Hey guys, it's Chris back with Smokescreen, and this is going to be my Star Wars Episode 7 Q&A video based off a lot of the feedback I've been getting on the last two Star Wars videos I did on Kylo Ren and his potential connection to the history of the Sith and line of the Sith Lords, as well as my video on Supreme Leader Snoke, who I think is going to be Darth Plagueis, or at least I'm hoping it's going to be Darth Plagueis. So yeah, let's get started in a galaxy far, far away. So our first question comes from Janet Ortiz, and they write, I got a question. How is the Rule of Two not canon when Darth Sidious mentions something about the Old Republic and the origin of the Sith and their homeworld of Korriban and the revenge of the Sith? So the Rule of Two is canon. Anything mentioned or shown in the movies, the shows, which includes the Clone Wars, Star Wars Rebels, and the 3 or 4 books that are not yet published, anything mentioned in those are canon, and the Rule of Two is in fact still canon. A couple examples of that: in Episode 1, when Qui-Gon was killed and they had Qui-Gon's funeral, we saw that Yoda and Mace Windu were standing there at the funeral pyre and mentioned this was a Sith, but the question is who was killed, the Master or the Apprentice? Only two there are. That kind of reaffirmed that, as well as the Clone Wars. You had Yoda go in the crypt of Darth Bane, who's the one who started the Rule of Two. So the Rule of Two is still considered canon. Again, I think the confusion comes in where when we're talking about Darth Plagueis, he wanted to abolish the Rule of Two as far as having any more Sith beyond him and Palpatine, because he wanted him and Palpatine to be the last Sith. He wanted to live forever with his knowledge of the Force and the midichlorians and be able to extend his life and Palpatine's forever and rule as equal. He was going to kind of abolish that, but as far as Palpatine, he still stood by it and obviously supposedly killed Plagueis, and we'll see if that holds true. And then of course he took Anakin as his apprentice. And I know somebody's going to ask about Darth Maul and Darth Tyrannus, which was Dooku, and I'll get to that in just a second. And this next question is from Tyrant Den, and he asks, now that I think about it, 1 through 3 Sith followed a sort of rule of 3, Plagueis, Sidious, Maul, and then Sidious, Tyrannus, Ventress, even Sidious, Vader, Starkiller. So yeah, this piggybacks right off the last question about the Rule of Two. So it's still, the Rule of Two still stands as far as Sidious is concerned, because when you think about Darth Maul, at the time Plagueis was still alive and Maul didn't know anything about Plagueis. So Maul was under the impression that he was a legitimate apprentice to Sidious, and Sidious was in fact just using him as kind of a Sith assassin. He already had his eye on Anakin, and also you saw in Revenge of the Sith when Anakin rescues Palpatine from his supposed kidnapping and he kills Tyrannus. Palpatine's the one in fact that told him to kill him. Dooku was a powerful Sith. He was trained in the arts of the Sith. It was kind of a backup contingency plan for Sidious, I think, since at this point Plagueis had been supposedly killed, but at the same time he was still after Anakin. That was his whole goal, was to use him as a tool until he got Anakin as an apprentice. In my opinion, you can't really count Darth Maul or Darth Tyrannus in the line of the Sith Lords, because they were more used as pawns or tools in the overall scheme, going back to Darth Plagueis. And our next question comes from Chad at the Our House channel, and he writes, wow, I've heard you mention some of this in conversation, but I never knew how deep the rabbit hole went. Really cool stuff. And I hope now that since this franchise has changed hands that it tracks like you said. So yeah, what he's referring to is this video I did on the history of the Sith. And again, I'll link the videos on the history of the Sith and the Darth Plagueis video, possibly being in Episode 7 in the description below as well. That's what's cool about Star Wars, Game of Thrones, things like that. You have this whole expanded universe to go off of, and it's written like it's real history. And that's one thing that intrigues me as a Star Wars nerd, or a Game of Thrones nerd, or what have you. These big epic sagas that have these, written histories, these backstories, these side stories. What I think is great about the Disney takeover is they're going to take it and they're going to do these movies that we all kind of used to wish we could see, like Boba Fett movies, for example, Han Solo and his origins, and all these extra side stories that we all love to read about, and all the expanded universe books, but now we're going to get to see that on film, and I think that's a good thing. So yeah, it's a lot of cool shit, and with that History of the Sith video, I mean, that was just barely scratching the surface. That was just some highlights basically along the timeline, just for viewers to kind of understand what I think is important about Kylo Ren and this Snoke character to be connected to, because I don't want it to be, again, my main point is that Kylo Ren and Snoke, or whoever this character is that I hope is Plagueis, is in fact Plagueis, or at least somebody connected to the line of the Sith Lords. I don't want it to be some random dark Jedi that just comes out of nowhere. To me, that's the most important thing. I think it ties it together when you have this lineage that continues. And our next question comes from Irk TV, and he writes, I read that Kylo Ren claims himself to be Darth Vader, or in spirit or something. and this mask is made out of pieces of Darth Vader's mask. So yeah, I'd heard some rumors about that as well, and I don't quite buy that. First of all, we know that Vader's dead. We've now seen two versions of Anakin's ghost, his Force ghost. I think Kylo Ren, in my opinion, and possible spoilers here, but again, it's complete speculation, I think Kylo Ren is going to be the other Solo kid. I think even though the expanded universe is no longer canon, as I mentioned in several comments, they can still pull what they want from there, or at least get ideas and inspiration from the EU. So I believe that Kylo Ren is going to be a former rebel. I believe that he is defected from the rebellion and became obsessed with the dark side, being Han Solo and Leia's child, being part of the Skywalker bloodline. And I think that he has become somehow or another obsessed with the dark side. And I think he's some kind of Sith artifact collector. If you look at that mask, it's so close to Darth Revan's. Now there's obviously a few differences from the Darth Revan artwork and the Old Republic video game that we've seen. So there is a difference, but they're also very, very similar. So they could actually make that Darth Revan's mask and just have a slightly different design because they can do that. Also, I think that if you look at his lightsaber hilt, the one that he has the crossbars on, it's not a new lightsaber design. The crossbars is something new to us, but if you look at the saber itself, it is very old. It looks like something that I welded together in my garage. We may see him being kind of a dark Jedi. He kind of fell because he was obsessed with it. Perhaps he's in touch with Snoke already. We don't really know. Hopefully he is the apprentice of Snoke, who I hope is, again, is Plagueis. He may or may not be an apprentice yet. I'm assuming he will be an apprentice to this Snoke character. You see him in the scenes we've already seen in the trailers that he does have stormtroopers with him. And I don't think he's just going to be running around with his own stormtroopers and not still be connected to the First Order. Perhaps we know the concept art that we've seen where this character is looking at Darth Vader's helmet. Perhaps that'll be him in the actual movie looking at it, and maybe he is obsessed with him. And if I'm right, and he is the other Solo kid, of course Anakin would be related to him. So I think, again, it's just my opinion that he's going to be essentially a dark Jedi, hopefully apprenticed to this Snoke character. So hopefully they tie that in, and that would be a great tie-in also if that is in fact Revan's mask. And with the lightsaber being old, it looks like that might be something he found somewhere and modified. And if you think about the big controversy about the fire-looking saber, where it's not like a regular plasma blade, that could be simply that he really don't know what he's doing, and he's got an unstable crystal, and perhaps that's why it kind of looks like fire, and it's not that smooth plasma blade we're used to, but kind of has that flickering effect to it. So maybe they'll explain it that way, where he is in fact just kind of a newbie who hasn't read my book Dark Side for Dummies yet. And our last question comes from Scotty Robot, and Scotty writes, "Hillbillies watch Star Wars? Who knew?" Why, yes sir, we sure do. What the hell you think? So hey guys, thanks a lot for all the questions and comments. I'll continue to do these on Game of Thrones, Star Wars, what have you. Just keep the comments and questions coming. Be sure to subscribe to get everything. And in the meantime, click here on the video I did on the history of the Sith, and you'll see what I'm talking about as far as how far this history goes back and how I think it's important to connect this Snoke character as well as Kylo Ren to this history. And if you're Game of Thrones nerds, click here for the Game of Thrones Q&A I did just a few days ago. And I'll continue to do those as well. These are really fun to do, so keep the questions coming. Thanks again, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.